right, fam. Well, first of all, I just want to let you know, introduce you guys to the panel a little bit. This is Gino. Gino is a junior, and he goes to SHAP. So we've been praying for him for his deliverance. And so Deborah is a junior also. She goes to Vista. She used to go to SHAP, but we prayed for her to get delivered, and she did. So now she goes, even though Vista lost our homecoming game on Friday. Sorry about your life, right? This is Hannah. Hannah is a senior. She is getting ready to enter the big bad world. And then I think the real hero of the panel here, this is Tony. Tony is an assistant principal at Fallbrook High School. So if you can spend every weekday of your life with 2,000 teenagers, hats off, bro. Right? You guys like, but don't you love teenagers? I'm like, not that much. Okay, so anyway, so we have been in this incredible series about generations, and if you are here for the first time, we just want to do a quick recap. Our key verse is Psalm 145:4, and it says that one generation shall praise your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts. And this has really been a phenomenal series. We haven't been afraid to talk about some of the more controversial issues. We haven't been afraid to say some of the things that the world is saying, and I'm really, really excited about that because what we discovered is that we talked about reasons why this verse is so hard to live out in our context and in our culture. We discovered quite a few reasons. And so what we did for the first time during this series is we started a high school small group. And so we got a bunch of high schoolers together and we said, listen, we want to have another conversation with you outside of the four walls of this church. And all of these people here are part of the high school small group. And so what we want to do is we want to have a conversation about some of the ways that we can connect to each other, because we've talked a lot about the divide. We've talked a lot about things that kind of separate us, where the areas where the generations have broken apart. But I think in discovering what has been broken, we can discover how to put it back together. So we really, in our high school small group as well, we had some phenomenal conversations about how to bridge that gap. And what we realized is that without us even knowing it, every single person, myself, Tony, my kids, these are basically my kids, it's fine. So without us even realizing it, this generational divide had really affected the quality of relationships. So we had a conversation, and Tony, I want you to kind of start off by telling us what you were telling our students a couple of Thursday nights ago.
So I think one of the things that the students need to understand, and that Gen Xers probably aren't willing to admit, is that we're afraid of you. And that's the truth. So we're supposed to be the experts. But in this world of technology that you guys are creating things, the potential for you guys to maybe know more than we know exists. So that makes us hesitant sometimes to kind of engage you guys, because we never want to put ourselves in a position that you guys feel like you're equal to us or better than us.
Hannah, how did you feel about that when you heard that for the first time?
I think for me, it made sense that you guys were, but I wished you weren't, and we need you not to be. But because you guys are supposed to be the people talking to us. But I think something for me was knowing that it allows me to talk to you guys in a more gentle way, and not be try to be less intimidating to you guys, more welcoming, maybe communicating better to make you feel less scared of us or intimidated by us.
So I like that, because the communication, I think, is the key. Us figuring out how to communicate with each other. One of the things that I think is difficult is for us to understand that we need to figure out how to communicate with you guys in order to understand you. So we need to be communicating with each other for understanding rather than just giving information, but also to be understood, because we speak very, very differently. What comes out of our mouth, or in most cases what comes out of your mouth, is not actually what we hear. And so I think understanding how we all communicate with each other, and understanding that we need to take the time to communicate to be understood first, I think can help bridge that.
Yeah, and I love, because in the group, Tony was like, you guys have this whole other language, and it's all emojis. And he's like, what does this emoji mean? What does that emoji mean? And the kids were breaking it down well, the grimacing one is like awkward, and he was like, I would have never known that. And so another thing that Tony said, and this really comes down to how as younger people we can relate to older people. And so that's the perspective that Tony is bringing. It's saying, hey, this is how you can change the way you come at us so that we can understand, so that you can get on our level. And so one of the things that Tony said in group was, he was like, I don't understand how you can be on your phone and having a conversation with me at the same time. And I'm not even lying, you guys. Chris was texting me at that exact moment, and I was like, I'm doing it right now, Tony. Like, I'm talking to Chris about something going down at church, and he was like, I don't understand how you can do it. And so I think the reality is like learning that, you know, the statistics are that with Gen Z, they can handle up to 6 screens at one time. I can do 4. I can do 4, but up to 6 screens. And so understanding with Gen Z, like Hannah, understanding, you guys understanding that when you're talking to your parents, what are you going to have to do in order for them to realize that that you're honoring them? What are you going to have to do?
Put our phones down.
And what else?
Look at them when they're talking.
And what else?
Actually respond.
Actually use words. Exactly. Actually use words. What about, Deborah, what about earbuds? There was a bit of a controversy in our group about earbuds.
Even though we're able to listen to our music while simultaneously taking in instruction, I think just be considerate of who you're talking to and unplug them. I mean, it's not that much of a sacrifice. You can play your music when you're done. So, I mean, just do that.
My job here is done, you guys. Pastor Henny, you come tell the older people what to do. Another thing that we talked about, and I love how Hannah said using words. One of the things that I think Gen Z really does struggle with is using words, about learning how to communicate priorities, about learning how to, because they are young, they still are learning how to navigate this life. But, you know, sometimes our teenagers were saying, sometimes, you know, we've got homework, we've got chores, we have all of these extracurricular activities, and so how do I manage it all? And there was kind of a conversation about, well, my mom told me to take the clothes out of the washer, but I'm studying for my ACT. And so, Gino, how did we discover how to rectify that? Do you remember?
I honestly, howdy. I really think that connection between both of the generations is a big deal, and I think questioning and saying like, how was your day, or just acting like you are interested or show some type of priority with what's going on with us. Like if you say, oh, well, how's your day, and I say good, maybe follow up with, well, can you tell me more about that, or just. It shows that you show a certain degree of priority to what we're saying. And I really think that that's crucial.
Yeah, I love that. And the reality is that Gen Zers have to learn, and millennials too, the younger generations, we have to learn how to navigate the world that we live in and do it with honor and with respect. And so Romans 12:10, it says, be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. I got my notes mixed up. But Romans 12:10 says, take delight in honoring each other. So, Tony, if you could say anything to our Gen Zers, what would you say to them about this idea of honor, about this idea that we have sacrificed for them?
So I think the thing that's important for the younger generation to understand is what we're thinking, especially Gen Xers, which I represent, in that we're working hard. We're doing a lot of things, in our opinion, to sacrifice so that you guys have, and not only have, but I think Gen X is really one of those generations that's big on the next generation having more than we had. So we work really, really hard to give you guys things, and we do it because we love you and we want to do that. But when we engage you and we don't get the response, the first thought we have is, everything that I do for you, you can't even look at me when I'm talking to you. So, I mean, I think to understand that kind of what we hear, meaning if based on me filtering this conversation through how hard I work, everything we try to provide for you, if I were to filter through that and I'm trying to talk to you and you are doing anything except for looking me in the eye and giving me your undivided attention, then I start to feel like you think something else is more important than I am, or has a greater priority where I have made you the priority in my life. And I'm asking for you to allow me to be the priority in your life for 5 minutes. You know what I mean? And and so that's kind of how we filter that. And I just wanted to say quickly, Jess was talking about words. One of the big words millennials and every generation after that uses, that Gen X and the generations before hate, is why. You guys love to ask why, right?
Why?
And
Why?
understanding what that word really means and how that could make us feel. You know what I mean? Because most times we don't take why from you guys as just trying to understand what we want you to do. We take it as questioning whether you're going to decide to do it or not. And so being able to communicate in a way that we all kind of understand. We know that you guys truly just want to know why, but at the same time, you guys understanding that in most cases, we feel like we are doing so much in our life, 80% of it to 90% focused on you, we shouldn't have to tell you why. And I'm not saying that that's right, but that's how we feel. And so if we're going to learn to communicate with each other, we have to get over that. So we have to figure out how to not come at you guys that way, but you guys also have to understand that's how we're filtering a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, that was so good. Can you guys give it up for Tony? Woo! I just want to let you guys know I can see all your faces, and I had a mom in the congregation raise the roof. She said, ooh, I felt that, right? And so, because here's the reality is that I don't think that there's one person in this room or that there's one person in this generational context that does not want to see younger people succeed. And I think the reality is that we are for you. We want you to win. We are your biggest cheerleaders, and we will pay whatever price that it takes in order for young people to win and to step into what it is that God has for them. And I think at the crux of this whole generational divide is simply just a miscommunication. And in the miscommunication, we pick up offenses. And in those offenses, we take those offenses and we run with them. And I think that's why so many families are being broken up right now. I think that's why so many people are hurting, is because we don't know how to speak each other's language. And so as younger people, and I'm not even young anymore, but the reality is I do have to learn to put my phone down. I have a problem. I will tell you to your face, you guys know me. If you're talking to me and you're communicating something that needs to be written down, I will say, if I'm not on my phone right now, I need you to tell me to put this down on my phone. And just learning how to communicate what's actually going on so you understand. Like in staff meeting, we used to have a rule that was like there were no phones allowed. And so I had to tell Pastor Myrna, this is where I take my notes. This is where I take everything. This is where I take my notes for church, et cetera, et cetera. And so learning how to communicate, I think our younger kids, and the reality is why does the Bible say honor your father and mother? Because he knows that we have a propensity to disrespect the older generation for whatever reason. And so honor has to be one of our highest goals as younger people. How do we honor the older people in our lives? How do we get outside of ourselves, outside of social media, and say, hey, you know what? I'm gonna put down my culture to honor you. And so now switching gears, teenagers, it's your guys' turn. Everyone's nervous. Did you feel the nervous silence? Nobody said anything. And so switching gears, how do you think that older people need to connect with younger people? Because the reality is that younger people think very differently than we do. Our culture is changing so quickly that some of these ideas and ideologies are kind of creeping in, and you think so different, and we don't always understand. So, Hannah, why don't you start by letting us know, giving us some tips about how to communicate?
All right, so I think before we can address how to communicate, we need to state the fact that us younger generations do want a relationship with you guys just as much as you guys want one with us. And it's not just a relationship where we say hi and bye and this and that, but it's one where we actually know that you guys care, where you guys are invested in us, where you're consistent. Because in a world where there's not much consistency, in a world where there's a lot changing, we need people and relationships with us that are consistent, that are devoted, that are reaching out to us, that do care. And not just baseline, but actually let us know what you've gone through. Let us in. Let us be vulnerable with us. Because when you're vulnerable with us, it allows us to be vulnerable with you. Like Pastor Henny says, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And for us, it's when we know how much you care, it lets us know, okay, well, then I can be real with this person. I can share with this person. I can be vulnerable. And so just be caring, be vulnerable, be real with us, want a relationship with us, because we want one with you.
And I think, thank you guys. And I think one of the challenges with that, and Tony, you can probably speak to this about this whole idea that we need to show that we care, is that I think sometimes in our culture, we worship our schedules, we worship our time, and we say we don't have time to reach out. So Tony, as an assistant principal with the crazy schedule that you have, what are some things that you kind of tell yourself to help you be more intentional about carving out time for the younger generation? What does that look like for you?
One thing for me, you have to make it a part of everything you're doing. I mean, if we took and we said we're going to sit time aside and, oh, this is when I'm going to talk to kids, it would either be so minimal or so meaningless that it really wouldn't matter. So I think it's important to incorporate it in all we do. You know, a quick example, I mean, when I'm walking around campus, literally, I may stop and say anything to anyone. Well, why are you doing that? Or, hey, I don't get it. Come here. Why do teenagers do that? And we'll stand there and have a conversation. And then maybe the rest of the day, I may walk around and every teenager I see, I may say, hey, I talked to one of your classmates earlier, and this is what they told me. Is that true? And what I found is kind of initiating some of those conversations. I've had students come by my office later. Hey, I heard you were asking this or that, or I heard this or that. So, you know, it's just kind of been a way to open the door. But more importantly, from a school standpoint, what I found is just creating some of those relationships has actually benefited us in a way that now those teenagers felt like there was an adult that they really could reach out to and that was really going to listen to them. And so they've brought problems in that we've actually been able to discuss, you know, and get to. So I think just like Hannah was saying, just us simply letting them know that we truly care about them cracks the door enough that they're willing to kick it open. We just have to unlock it and crack it.
Yeah, exactly. And I love how I just lost my train of thought. I love how Pastor Henny said, and I think Paul was talking is somewhere in the Bible. Pastor Henny's gonna help me out. Somewhere in the Bible. The reason I don't memorize the Bible is because I do have Netflix. Okay, so it's a problem. But you know, Paul, it's fine. It's fine. Paul says, you know, you have many teachers, but not many of you have fathers. Yeah. And I think the reality is that we have students, we have young people that are craving fathers and mothers, spiritual fathers and spiritual mothers, not just in our own context of your own family, but how do you come alongside of somebody who's not in your family? How do you do that? And I think that's kind of the crux of what it is that we have to get to. I love what Gino was saying about just asking the next question. Yeah. Ask the next question. Don't just ask your teenager, how was your day? Because they're not going to tell you. Because they're grouchy. They have hormones. And
I'm right here.
What did you say, Gino? Say it to my face. You know what I mean? So, Deborah, I mean, how do you feel when an adult comes alongside of you and shows more than just surface level that they actually care? How does that validate you as a person?
To go along with what Hannah was saying, just building that authenticity, it makes me feel more valued and not just something that you just pass by each day and you're like, oh, hey, it's more like it's deeper than that. And just to touch on what she was saying, like just being more, it makes you want to be more vulnerable with that person and just strengthen your relationship with them.
Yeah, and I know one of the things from older generations is kind of like that street evangelism where you just stand on the corner and shout out. And that does not work for this generation. You know what I'm saying? It did what it did, and we honor it for what it was. Pastor Andy's laughing too loud. Do you have something to say about that, Pastor? You want to come get the microphone? You know, and so the reality is these kids, they want a conversation. They want to know why. They want to know not just why, because I want to have an attitude, even though they do have attitude, right? Sometimes I'll walk past a teenager, just snatch their phone out of their hand, You know, as I'm walking, they're like, hey, and then it opens up the conversation. Please don't do that unless you know them, right? And so, you know, I think one of the things about that street evangelism vein of thought is that part of that relational connection boils down to this: don't talk at me, and don't be quick to prove that you're right and that I'm wrong. Deborah, do you want to? I mean, how do you feel when somebody shuts you down immediately? Like, how does that make you feel when an older person does that?
Okay, so at the end of the day, we're not going to agree on everything, but if you're never willing to consider my side or my point of view, then to me it's like, okay, this person has automatically lost the right to influence me in my life. And when you shut us down, it only builds more tension within that relationship. And sometimes it even pushes us to the point where we don't want to hang out around you. But if both sides serve the conversation rationally, then I think that it definitely connects the gap in that relationship.
Gino, how do you feel about that? He's a man of many words.
I'm a man of many words.
It's because I told him he couldn't talk about politics, okay? If we were talking about politics, he would be preaching.
All right, so, man, I really think that out of all this, I think that the biggest thing that we should consider is perception. And reason being is like, for example, I love my mama and I'm a mama's boy. I'm really open about that. But whenever I'm doing the dishes, I like to listen to music. I like to keep my headphones in, and my mom sees it as disrespectful. I work really well listening to music. So for me, I'm not trying to be rude, but I'm really trying to listen to music too. You know? And so I think that perceptual gap between what one generation perceives as rude and what the other one doesn't is exact. I think that's a key thing to really like analyze and look at and be like, okay, this is this. How can we understand each other better? You know?
Yeah, and the Bible does say that love believes the best. And the reality is love. It all boils down to love. As younger people, do we love and honor the older generation the way that we should, the way the Bible tells us to? And as older people, do we love and assume the best? And I know if you have teenagers, you're like, you're not in my world. You know, but do we continually bring those things to Jesus and lay down those minor offenses and let those things go in order not to sever that relationship? And I think as far as what Deborah was saying about don't be quick to prove me wrong, I think a part of that has to mean that as older people, we have to learn how to be unoffendable. Yeah. And we live in a culture where there's such offense. But the reality is that these kids think differently than you do. They think differently than I do. And as adults, we feel the need to be quick to correct. Because we know that it is our job to bring them up in the way that they should go and to teach them the biblical foundation of the word. But my question is, are we teaching them or are we shutting them down? Are we just shutting them down? And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Because I think as adults, to some degree, we get nervous in allowing a conversation because we feel like having that conversation is condoning that mentality. And so we get nervous. And so in our nervousness, we just shut down. We just say, no, well, that's not what the Bible says, so that's it. We're done. But that doesn't work for this generation because not only it was different when you were growing up. All you had to deal with was the kids at your school. These kids are a connected generation. So they're not only are they dealing with ideology just in their culture, in their community at their school, they're dealing, now it's coming at them from all over the world all of the time. And so they're filtering through information that we never had to process. And so their process has to change. And I think that's where the why comes in. That's where why do you believe that? Because over here in this country, this person said this on Twitter, and so now the whole world is talking about on Twitter. We don't even have a Twitter. Yeah. So we don't even know what it is that they're really engaged in. And I think we cannot be afraid to have the conversation. We can't be afraid. And I think sometimes as Christians, what we are is we are afraid to step into the sin. But that's exactly what Jesus did. That's exactly what he did. He said, this is not working, so therefore I will come. And he stepped into the middle of a wicked and a perverse generation. And in stepping into it, he was able to have the influencing conversations. And you know, I think the one person that we could all learn this from is Pastor Miranda. Pastor Miranda is brilliant at having this conversation with young people because I mean, honestly, she's so good at, earlier this week I was in her office and I cracked a joke about something that's culturally offensible. And, and it was a joke, right? But I was like, it's fine. But she said, no, really, what do you think about that? And I was like, oh, well, let me tell you how I really feel. And so Landon was there, and he jumped on the bandwagon because that's what we do with each other. And so we had this conversation, and she wasn't afraid to hear out my thought process. She wasn't afraid to listen to something that she didn't agree with. She let me have it out. And you know what? After she let me have out the conversation, she was able to sit back and say, here's your hole here. Here's your hole here. Here's your hole here in this argument. What about where the Bible says about these things? She didn't shut me down. She didn't say, well, you know, you work at a church, you should be better than that. She literally said, okay, have the conversation. And at the end of the day, do you know what she did? She was like, well, we're not going to agree on this, so. You know, and I think being emotionally and spiritually mature enough to do that, to have those conversations where these kids, some of the things that come out of their mouth terrifies me. I'm like, where in the crap did that come from? Well, I don't understand. Like, sometimes I don't have the answer. Gino on Thursday asked me about dinosaurs, and I did have an answer, right? But I didn't before. But it's like kids ask questions that you don't know how to have the answers. Like, Hannah, how do you feel about that? Because I think that's one thing that makes older people nervous to have a conversation with you.
I think when, like, okay, so how you guys are talking about, like, older people asking us questions, I think sometimes when we might ask you guys questions, one thing is we're not always looking for you guys to have the right answer. I think when sometimes, like she was saying, at first I didn't have the right answer, but then I had the answer. I think for us, when you let us know, hey, like, I may not know this, or we don't know this, but let's go figure this out. But, like, actually take the steps to figure it out. Have a conversation like she was saying Pastor Miranda and Jess had. Like, let's have these conversations. Let's figure these out. Don't just shut us down, or don't just be like, make up an answer. Like, why would you make up an answer? We know that you're lying. But yeah, like, let's figure it out. Take the conversation.
She said lies. I think the reality, I think at the end of all of this, I think trust in this generation is not something that we can afford to lose.
Yeah.
I think that we live in a world where they don't know the difference between virtual and reality. And I think because of that, our culture has created insane trust issues. And if as the church we continue to look like the world, if as the church we pretend like we have all the answers, because they already know that we don't. Because who's the only one that has all the answers? Is Jesus. And I think the one thing that I so appreciate about this generation is that they don't put us on a pedestal. They don't. They don't expect us to be God. They expect us to point to God. They expect us to walk with them to God. And I think that's the different mentality that we have to have, is like, and this is where Christianity is going to cost you your life. Because this is where, as older people, we are not in their worlds. Some older people hear about transgender issues and they just say, I just don't get it, and shut down. But how is that going to help this generation navigate that? So put down Netflix, put down CNN, put down Fox News, and open a book and learn about how to connect with this generation. And learn and put aside our pride. It all boils down to us putting aside our pride and saying, I need to learn new ways to connect. I need to learn new ways. And putting down our pride and saying to a young person, I don't understand. He wants to be a boy, but he wants to be a she, but she's a he, and now they want to be called they and us and them, and it is confusing. But these kids are not afraid to help us think through that process. And in them helping us think through that process, that's where we gain the platform to speak into their lives. I think we have a lot of people that want to preach at students but don't want to do life with them. And I think that's the problem in this generation, is that we need to put down our lives, put down our agendas, put down our idea about what our lives should look like, and look at these three kids. Let me tell you, for people who say that there's no hope for the next generation, do you know what I say? Lies. Because I got three kids. Gino's fixing his eyebrows for live stream.
Hey. How you doing?
I got 3 kids right here that are here for worship practice on Tuesday nights, that are here worshiping on Wednesdays, that are out setting up in the parking lot, that are pursuing God, that are seeking God, that are asking the hard questions, that are showing up week in and week out. There is hope for this generation. There is absolutely hope. But that hope is contingent upon whether or not we are going to take this generation's campaign seriously and the mandate that God has called us to stop what we are doing and to get into the life of other people. That's what it's contingent on. And I think that's why I love what about this panel and this conversation that we had is that what's amazing is that every single strategy for connection that these kids have given us, that Tony has talked about today, is a strategy that Jesus already modeled for us. It's a strategy of connection. I find it fascinating, and I'm going to close with this, that the longest recorded conversation in the entire Bible was between Jesus and a Samaritan woman. This is significant because culturally speaking, Jesus and this woman would have no reason to be speaking to one another. No reason whatsoever. In fact, the cultural climate at that time dictated that they should not even be occupying the same physical space. Have you ever seen a very old person with a very young person and seen a friendship develop? Culturally, that doesn't make any sense. Culturally, that's kind of weird. And so Jesus does this, and he defies the cultural norm. And what he does is the longest conversation, and this was a deliberate and strategic conversation initiated by Jesus. It's in John 4, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I want to draw attention to how Jesus started and ended the conversation. Jesus opens the conversation by asking a question. He actually says, this is what he says in John 4:7. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" Now, you may think that this request has no significance. Okay, he asked her for some water, no big deal. But that's not true, because by asking for a drink, Jesus acknowledged that she had something that he did not have. He put his pride aside. Could he have got water? Absolutely. He was the Son of God. He could have said, bam, water. But what he did is for relationship. He said, "Will you give me a drink?" Because here's the thing, and this is so important because in our current culture, we go all feminist, right? Jesus was a dude in Middle Eastern culture 2,000 years ago. He did not have to ask that woman for a drink. He could have said, "Give me a drink." He could have said, I am the Son of God. I demand for you to give me water. And in that culture, he would not have been unjustified. But he comes at her in a way that gave her opportunity to let him in. Already there was something different about him. There was something different about the question that he asked. And in his own way, in this encounter, when you read between the lines, there's a vulnerability. He's saying, you have something that I don't have. As older people, we have to learn how to say, you have something that I don't have. When we initiate conversations with people that are divided with us in some way, it's so important that we come at them with that humble mindset, with that humble attitude, already placing value. By saying, you have something I don't have, what are we doing? We're placing value. Young people, by going to your parents and by going to older people and saying, you have something that I don't have, because we do. We have experience. We have life. We have the knowledge of the Word of God. We've learned how to navigate it. We have something that you don't have. And so by both of us acknowledging in this party that we both have something that we don't have, and we build that trust through that vulnerability. That's how trust is built. By revealing our own weaknesses and acknowledging another's strength, what it is that we're saying is that we are saying that, hey, I need something from you. Now, did Jesus need water from her? No, because in the conversation, there's never any evidence that Jesus ever got that water. Like, nowhere in the Bible does it say while he was drinking his water that he got what he needed, right? But by asking her for a drink, Jesus had no intention of taking anything from her. But he had every intention of giving something to her, but he changed the way that he came at her. He came at her in a way that she would understand that this man values me, that this man sees my dignity, that through all of my mess, because sometimes we can look at this next generation and we can say, they are a hot mess, because we are. We are a hot, but through it all, Jesus placed value on her. So much more that when his disciples got back after he had this conversation, they offered him food, and do you know what he said? I'm good. I don't need it. I wonder if more than we wanted to build our own lives, if more than we wanted to build our own families, our own careers, our own 401k, I don't even know what that means because Lulu does all my stuff for me, right? All of that stuff. If more than we wanted to build our own retirement fund, that we wanted to connect with each other as a church. I wonder if we wanted that more than anything else, what this church would look like. I wonder what it would look like if instead of darting out the back door after service to go back to your own lives, you went out into the cafe, bought a coffee, and had a conversation with someone that doesn't look like you. Because the reality is that this is the body of Christ. This is where we draw strength from each other. We draw strength from each other. This is the family of God. It's not about you and your family going to lunch. It's about the family of God operating in the way that God has called us to operate. I'm not saying that the family of God is not dysfunctional. Read the Old Testament. Every person has dysfunction. But what I am saying is that when we buy into this idea that we are a body connecting to each other, I think it's going to change what this place looks like on a Sunday morning. I think that you're not going to walk in stressed out. I think you're going to walk in excited to see your brothers and sisters in Christ. I think you're not going to run out trying to go to whatever Baptist to the restaurant. I think you're going to come out here, and I think that the church will be strengthened in a way that we have not seen yet in this Temecula Valley. I think that we take that spirit where we go out there and connect with each other and actually take the time to get to know each other. We take that spirit out into this community. That's what revival is going to look like. Our next revival is not going to look like one preacher in a stadium. It's going to look like thousands of Christians with that spirit unleashed on the community. That's what that's going to look like. Revival is not going to look the same. It's not going to look like Azusa. It's not going to look like Billy Graham. And it's going to look like me and you leaving this place and intentionally being like Jesus, connecting with every shape, size, form, age, gender, non-gender, whatever it takes for us to do what it is, to do what Jesus did. And that is to reach and to connect to a lost and dying world. And we have to be the people to stop what we wanted to do, what we thought our lives should look like, what we thought our retirement should look like, and look to these kids and say, whatever you need for me to set you up, I will do it. Whatever it costs when I thought my life was going to look like, I will give it. Because these conversations with these kids, unfortunately, most often happen at 1 o'clock in the morning. Parents, you guys know what I'm talking about. Most often when they want to talk to you about life issues, it's like 12:30. I used to put my phone on Do Not Disturb before I go to sleep. I don't anymore because I know there's going to be a teenager that is going to have a crisis at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'll be the only one awake. Could it be that there could be somebody else in this church that's awake as well? Could it be? Revival is coming, you guys. And I want to be a part of it. And I want you to be a part of it. I don't want you to miss out on what God is doing because he's not going to just do it through us. He's going to do it through them. The next revival is going to look like them initiating Bible studies in their high school. Not led by an adult. Not led by somebody. It's going to be them. So in this place, we have to set them up with everything that we have. See, this woman didn't trust Jesus because she didn't know him. But by the end of the conversation, she did know him. Not just that he was a nice guy, but at the end of the conversation, Jesus revealed his divine nature to her. And the truth is that Jesus wants that same encounter with you. Jesus just doesn't come to give us a list of rules and regulations. The Bible says that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And if you're in this place and you don't have that life-giving relationship with Jesus, that to you all this looks like is a set of rules and regulations, let me tell you, Jesus walked among us so that he can bring flesh to the Word. And that Jesus is the author and the finisher of our faith. That Jesus did not just die on a cross 2,000 years ago, but he is now seated at the right hand of the Father interceding for us. Jesus gave his life so that you could have access to the presence of God. And in the presence of God is the fullness of joy. It's the fullness of peace. It's his presence that changes everything. It's his presence that corrects. It's his presence that loves. And we live in a world where there is no presence of God. And if you've lived your whole life, I'm a first-generation Christian. If you have lived your whole life without the presence of God, you are missing out on one of life's greatest gifts. And it only comes through Jesus. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me.